are there any additional generation resources from a UAMPS perspective that we're aware of in the near future that we can get a share of?
They're doing studies now on geothermal and,
yeah.
and more natural gas. There's the CFPP project,
yep.
carbon-free power project, yep. That is kind of, we're still looking at that.
But it's in the study phase right now, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, it's partway through the regulation
gotcha.
phase of it. So yeah.
But that project is planned for being available in 29 and 30, I think.
Yeah.
So it's not an immediate solution.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
definitely not.
And that's helpful to know, right? Because it's, even with market fluctuations, the matter of the fact is some of the market price fluctuations are really going to be driven by the scarcity of resources, I would assume, and from the things that I've heard, right?
Right. That's exactly what happened the last couple of months. So.
Yeah.
And also, a lot of the cities are looking at internal generation to help curb those peaks in the summertime, like we talked about doing also.
Yep.
I have a question. Could you explain that a little bit? What that looks like, internal, what was the word you used? Yeah, generation. Because I read about it a little bit earlier today, and I'm not quite sure what that means.
Yeah, it means having your own generators to produce power in your city. So you could, you're to get a high load, you can start those up and cover those peaks.
Okay.
Or,
and
how large it is.
How much power are we talking with those generators for a city like ours?
It just depends on how much, how big you want to go.
Just to give you, sorry, Bruce, just to give you an example, Hiram City is currently installing 2 generators, gas turbines, and they're producing about 7.5 megawatts each.
Oh, okay.
So they'll be sitting at about 14, which it give you in comparison. Right now, that would be here in Kaysville. That would be one whole entire substation, the Burton substation. This last year was pushing about 910. And then part of another substation. We do have a unique dynamic that will be a challenge here in Kaysville. As I've talked to some of these, we fortunately have a very good resource here in our Power Commission with Alan Farnes at Bountiful and his experience with their generation and everything. And where if we do this, we don't have a loop per se, a transmission loop in Kaysville. So we're limited to really, if we do build internal generation, to that only being able to feed one of our substations. Okay. We are looking at a possible option if we do go this route of having our own internal generation to help compensate for as a resource, that we would be able to utilize 2 substations, the main and the west, where they're tied with the 46 line. But that's still up in the air whether we can actually make that work. It's something that we're trying to figure out and look into. So that's kind of an example. There are a lot of cities right now that are doing this, their own internal generation. A lot of them that already have it, and they are increasing the amount that they have as well.
What would be the ballpark cost initially to do it for one of those?
11 million or 20?
Per generator?
It seems I'd have to go back and look, because we asked Hiram for a bunch of their information, and
but it's in the upper millions, around 10.
Yeah, it's like it's a 20-year payoff.
Okay,
that's about 11 years, or sorry, about 11 million for their one
11.9.
11.9. Okay.
So thank you. And so that's kind of what we'd be looking at. Is something along those lines.
Okay.
Sorry, Alan, did you?
Well, I was just going to make a comment here that this is not just a Kaysville problem. It's every member of UAMPS is having issues, and some much more severe than Kaysville. Actually, Kaysville's in pretty decent shape compared to some of the others. So it's not any decision we've made here that's created the problem. It's just the market and the resources. They start shutting them down, and resources get scarce and the price goes up.
Yeah, thank you. That is very, very true. So we're seeing some other cities are already approving large increases, 18, 20%, with prediction that they're going to increase again later this year. So there's a lot of concern there. It's UAMPS all the way, and I even believe that it expands far beyond UAMPS into the whole power industry. And we're going to start seeing a lot of concerns and issues across the board. So, basically what I'm looking for tonight is I'm hoping, and I'm open for other suggestions as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm hoping to go to council with a specific request, and the request this time that we've determined to help us better evaluate is we know we have a for sure maintenance need. It was before even the November, December, the last 3 months of crazy increases, we had a need just to maintain our power costs. So as you can see, it was recommended before we even knew all the demand and everything else back in 2016 that we would see these rate increases, and now it's even more. So what I'm hoping is to take something along the lines of something straight across the board, 5% increase,
Yeah.
a 5% increase in per kilowatt hour, straight across the board, both commercial and residential, to buy us a little bit of time to maintain our power costs, hopefully give us some cushion and help us not have to rely on reserves as much, so that we can properly reanalyze what we need to do, whether that be a rate restructure, time of use.
Time of use, yeah.
Time of use will be potentially a very beneficial thing with the increased electric vehicles and high during peak hours having high demand and stuff like that. So those are all things that we want to carefully evaluate and make sure that we go about it properly. Hopefully maybe this fall we can have a better solution and answer to what that rate restructure would look like. But in the interim, we're just asking, what I would like to ask council is for just a simple 5% rate increase across the board that will help us with that maintaining.
So really quick with that, and I mean, that seems to make sense to me, but, again, we obviously know that there's there's customer rate charges at the residential, commercial, and industrial level, right? You also have service charges. There's the tiering that we see there. So when we talk about a flat 5%, my sense is we probably want to at least make sure that in whatever we do recommend to council that we're pretty specific with what that entails.
Okay.
If it's the per kilowatt hour charge that we're talking about, 5%, I'm just throwing this out there, right, as an idea. And then whether it's customer service charges, which I mean, those are kind of the one-offs, right? We're really talking about the true variables, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Then that's what we would kind of take a look at. Is that kind of what the thinking would be then?
Well, I guess, Brent, so you're asking, I mean, when we talk about a 5%, yeah, so it's like, your monthly bill goes up 5% versus the one-time fees and charges. Do those also go up 5%, or do we just the kilowatt hour charge?
Yeah, so the proposal I had was that we would leave all the excess charges alone.
And like demand charges as well?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and we would only increase the kilowatt hour charges, 1 to 1,000, 1,000 above. Those would those categories would increase 5% on the rate.
And that's across residential, all commercial classes, and industrial. That's what we're thinking?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I totally agree with that. I somewhat being in the electric vehicle business, it is coming. And cars are the small part. When you start talking about doing electrical, service vehicles, we're doing electric buses. I mean, the the charging on those things is incredible. And so, you know, I think it's naive to think it's not going to come, because I think it is. And I think Kaysville, I think we need to look ahead and we need to plan accordingly. So I would be in full support of the 5%.
I think so too, particularly if we've got it very focused on the per kilowatt hour charge. We're not really focused on demand charges at the commercial or industrial level, right? Sorry, I gotta make sure I'm talking in the mic here. Or the customer service charges as well. I mean, I think we gotta be focused on that. But
And we're still talking about doing, because in our last meeting we had talked about going out with an RFP to do a rate study this spring and this summer, and we're still thinking of doing that. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Or what would we do on that?
we're going to kind of assess a little bit more in depth. Definitely, a rate study at a third party is very costly. And that is definitely on the table to be considered, to have a third party do a rate study and give us a recommendation. It'll also be very interesting to see what all the other evaluations that all the other cities are doing that share the same resources that we share, and what kind of variances they make. One thing to also recognize is that, you know, even though it's not comparing apples to apples, everybody wants to compare us to Rocky Mountain Power, and it just isn't the same.
You can't do that.
It
Can't do
doesn't
that.
work that way,
Yeah.
anyways. But you know, if they want to look at that, even a 5% increase now still puts us below what their rates you know are, but
right.
when people ask me all the time, want to compare, and it's like, well, it's very difficult to be able to compare those two, because they're just not, it's just not the same.
No.
So would a 5% cover how we've been the last few months? Needing to purchase from everywhere else, we would still be behind with a 5% increase.
Yeah, even with a 5% increase, if things were to continue as they were, say in December, it would not cover the full amount, no.
But it would narrow the
It would
gap
narrow the
while we
gap,
evaluate, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah, and we do, one of the major issues that we had in December was a major resource issue that we have that has been resolved. They're back in full function now, and
But if it happens again.
But your January bill is going to be very similar to December's bill.
Yes.
Yep, because it didn't go back online until the very end
Of January.
So
Yeah.
and so, you know, it is very alarming, and I don't know who made the comment, but it's very true. What happens, you know, we don't know what happens when another resource goes down, or another turbine has a problem, or something has to be readdressed, and now we're back in the same situation.
Better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Have you done a projection as to what you think the rates will be for the next 6 months? Because 5% is not going to really do much. If you look at year over year, because December went up 200% over last year. November went up 150% over last year. We're up 25% on average over last year. So it seems like we're going to have to go much more than 5% if those hold for the next 6 months.
I was just gonna say they're projecting that with the natural gas costs coming down now, that's gonna level out a little bit. It's still gonna be higher, but it's not gonna be as volatile as it has been the last couple of months. Yeah, 100 and people were back on.
Nebo,
My comment on how to apply this, if you don't apply it to the demand charge on commercial, then the residential are carrying the bigger part of the load, because that's their kilowatt hour rate's way lower than residential, and they're not going to get the same impact if we only apply it to half of their bill. So I would recommend that we apply it to the demand and the kilowatt hour.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking about that.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yep. And I guess, I mean, without making the motion, because I agree, Ed, with kind of what you're saying. I mean, there's that sense of, you know, getting a sense for, you know, there's an opportunity here to narrow the gap, but we also really need something more substantial, I think, to be able to really purposefully,
Yeah, because
Do
it
you
looks
think-
like our usage is not,
yeah.
it's up a little bit, but not significantly. So it's going to be the per unit cost that's going to hurt us the most, so.
Yeah.
Because if you include December, we're actually at 9 million, not 7 million. So,
So if we were to evaluate, I guess when could we do that as part of a rate study and comparative review?
So we were planning on having everything done before the fall to readdress, kind of off from the fiscal year.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to hit the residents and
A
everybody.
couple times, yeah.
You know, anyways, right in the middle of the budget year and everything for council and all that. So our intent was the 5% would help us maintain.
Until that time.
Until that time, and that would give us approximately six to 7 months from now to have the study, to evaluate what the other cities are doing, what the resources are doing, gas prices, where are we sitting on our loads, and then be able to address also, if it is necessary, still allow us time for a third-party rate study to be
Yeah.
performed, and then present it at that time this fall for a final evaluation to determine what that restructure may look like. Right now, for example, time of use, we saw a very unique period in December, January, where we were being charged peak hour prices even through the night. So time of use charges really don't do you a whole lot of good because you're getting charged those high rates around the clock. But that was also a very unique situation we were in, and we may see that time of use, those fluctuations return, which I predict they will. And that time of use is now going to become a very crucial item to consider and to analyze and determine if that's something that meets our rate restructure and what would be beneficial for us.
so what has been our deficit, say, the last 2 or 3 months?
Sorry, Sadie.
How much has our deficit been the last 2 or 3 months?
November, our deficit was about 50,000. December, it was $500,000. January is probably going to be pretty similar.
Okay.
It'll probably be a couple 100,000, I'm guessing. Wouldn't you say that? We haven't seen it yet. We haven't received that yet, so we don't know. But my prediction is that it will be.
So if we do just a rough calculation, if we're expecting our revenues to be 16 million, which it says, so 5% is like $800,000.
Yep.
So you think that would be?
Yeah, so November, December, and January, we were in a bit of a unique situation where we were getting hit a lot harder, significantly harder than we typically do. If you check the numbers in those months, you'll see that that's what drove our average so high to 88.7 cents. Was those 3 months really drove it super high. And the reason that was such an issue is that we did have resources that were down, and we were having to rely on the open market for purchasing of power, which that has currently been resolved. We're no longer being dependent on open market during this off-season time. Typically during these months, November, December, January, we have 1, maybe 2 resources that are able to cover our whole entire load because we're so low. And so we're able to purchase power through those resources at a very reasonable cost. But because they were down and being worked on, we were dependent on the open market, which has never happened before during those months. So that has been resolved. And so I don't predict we're going to see that same level. It is very fair to say that we won't see the same level of increase that we saw in November, December, and January. But we will still see elevated levels, more similar to what we saw before those months of this, like the 7.2, 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour.
So basically, the 5% increase would just cover the last 3 months.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it'll
Yeah,
even
it
cover
doesn't.
that.
That
But,
doesn't,
but,
It won't even cover that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but it will minimize the impact
Yeah, it
instead
minimize
of,
the impact.
just staying where we're at and keep digging deeper into the hole.
What is our reserve balance?
what is our what?
Our reserve balance?
So right now we had 2.5 million reserves with UAMPS. After December, we now have 2 million. And then that's a purchasing cost reserve with UAMPS that we have. And then our reserves with the city are 9.2 million. But our recommended reserves for the power department off of UAMP's recommendation of 6 months operation, power costs, our biggest asset, that kind of thing, is 9.8. So we're 0.6 million below what the recommended reserve is to have allotted to the department. So and we're actually, our reserves are above the recommendation if you want to take into consideration UAMP's power cost reserves, but that's kind of its own separate reserve.
Well, and you need some of this reserve to work on system
Yes.
upgrades.
Definitely.
In
Yep.
fact, we've committed 2 million
Yep.
for the
Just in
transformers we've purchased, that we've ordered anyway.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, with the upgrades that we have talked about and are planned, I mean, like say 5% is minimal to even try to even cover that and to start providing enough resources to cover the upgrades that we want to do. So, yeah, I mean, 5% is, I would think, very minimal that we do. I'd hate to throw out the 10% number, but 5% is pretty. That's not much.
One of my concerns with and I would be tickled to death to go a little bit higher than 5%, just because that would definitely alleviate some stress and strain and concerns that we will have over the interim of a future restructure this fall. And potentially with that good of an increase, we may feel that we would be okay to push it a little bit, maybe readdress next spring. I don't know. That's all stuff that we would have to look into. A concern I do have is I am a little bit nervous getting council to approve this right now because they have been slightly not 100% opposed, and it's not that they're not willing to listen and entertain an increase, but there have been some vocal comments that they don't feel that an increase is necessary this time, and they'd like to see what the next few months bring. And I feel that a 5% would be something that would be a little bit easier for me to pitch and get them to move forward with it this time. But I do agree with Gray here that a 10% would be a lot more appropriate, I think, for the current situation that we're in, the dire straits that we're in, the resources aren't coming back, things aren't going to change all that dramatically, and a 10% would definitely be a number that would be a lot more dependable to help us close that gap. And so if your recommendation is 10%, I will gladly take that.
Nate, what is the pulse of the city council?
Okay, I would, happily try to explain to the best of my ability our reasoning. And, I think what it is, we've seen so many unprecedented issues come to light. Our inflation is out of control, and then there's a war going on in Ukraine, and we've had Nebo down, and you said Hunter was down, and we're talking about, 2 months of extremely high, where the rates just skyrocketed. And so I think from the council's perspective, we're just really concerned with the inflation and with all the rising costs across the board. And, in our discussions, we understand that we really need to raise rates. Even in terms of taxes on the city. I mean, what happened with our neighbor city pulling out of our emergency services? That left a huge hole in our budget. And so we're going to have to make some tough decisions, but I think it's hard for us to wrap our head around the dire need of it. And I'm listening, but I'm trying to put together the dots so I can take what you say tonight back to the council. Because at the end of the day, we need power. We need our power to be on. We need to be reliable, and we need to get it at an affordable price. Some of the comments that have been made in our council is, we're kind of basing this off a few months, but we really haven't. I don't think the what to expect in the future has really been laid out adequately to us, and perhaps we need to sit down and have that conversation more clearly. But looking at the numbers, when we base November and December, when we look at those numbers, it is a crisis mode. But I feel like from a council perspective, we want to see what the next few months bring and then kind of assess.
Well, and one thing I might add, if I might, Chairman, is there was a review done last summer. I'm not sure if you would have seen that or heard that, but we were looking at peak numbers, right? You remember, Brian, when we were going through that. That actually tells, even outside of resource limitations, the peak usage and the cost for the peak usage at that point in time that was a pretty compelling story. That's when we were talking a little bit more about time of use and the potential opportunity to be able to leverage that in the future. But that's one more data point, right? The actual spike in usage that we're getting during peak months, during peak hours, and if you add to that a resource-constrained environment, the problem that I think that we may encounter, right, and again, it's May, we're really kind of assessing here, but those peak months, that's been a steady state thing. You see that every year, and it's only gotten tighter because of the growth that we've seen in Utah, right, in every community across the board. And so I think that is something that does need to be considered when we get into those summer months. That's going to be that may test us a bit.
Okay.
So.
And that would be good to maybe re-review as a council, pull back that data and kind of look at it and include that in this discussion. So that's helpful to know. And one quick question about what you mentioned, Brian. Our goal is to have 6 months where we can afford power, and that's what, 9.7 million or 9.8? What was the number you threw out? Oh, 9.8 is the recommended reserves? Okay, but right now we have 11.2 total. Can I just add it up like that? Is that sufficient to say that potentially all of that 11.2 could be put towards that recommended amount?
Yeah, there's approximately 2 million at this point that is in the UAMPS power purchasing reserve, and then we have 9.2 in the power department's reserve.
I think that's a sticker too for the council, and it's possibly just an education issue. And I am all ears, and I'm happy to take back everything you tell me tonight, but could you talk to that a little bit? I'll kind of leave it open to, why would we raise rates 5% if we essentially we're over the recommended amount, and then we're still making money? If you break it up to a few months, we're losing money, but across the board, we're pulling in less money, but we're still pulling in money. If you could just kind of speak to that a little bit, help me understand, and the people of Kaysville to understand. So.
Well, one part of it is that we've already committed $2 million to buy transformers. So you're already down at your minimum. That is over a couple of year period. But if you eat away at that reserve, you won't have the money to even pay for the transformers.
But we'll still be pulling in money, correct, every year. I mean, if we base it off the last, so many years.
And not nearly at the rate we were.
Mm-hmm.
You might make some money, but and the other issue is I don't know if we're talking the generation facility here in Kaysville, if we go out to bond for that, the bonding agencies are going to require you to maintain that. You don't drop down below that reserve. It's not money available for us to use.
Okay.
As soon as you do, it will automatically trigger a rate increase.
Okay. And that's really helpful to know, and I think that should probably be a part of the discussion with the council, like looking to the future and ensuring that we have reliable power at an affordable price. I think that would help us to kind of understand what to expect. And I'm just going to throw this in there. When we discuss potentially the Proposition 5 issue and pulling and taking money, we were just under the impression that it was very healthy, the needs of the power department, and so initially that's kind of what spawned the conversation. But as a council, we're absolutely doing our due diligence to take in public input, your input. And I just want to make that clear that we don't want to make any rash decisions. And speaking personally for myself, I'm concerned about that, especially with the last couple months. And so I'm all ears on the needs of the future and what we need to do to shore that up. So.
And Nate, the one thing to remember is what Brian said at first. That 5% is, we needed that long ago and before any power cost changes. So that's a whole separate, a need before.
See, and that's helpful to know too. Could you re-explain that again? So in 2016, you raised rates, and then has the city raised rates or power raised rates since then?
No.
So no rate increases?
We did do a summer rate change where our rates are slightly different in the summer.
Okay.
It stays the same from up to 1,000 kilowatt
Okay.
hours, but then above that, we charge 11 cents rather than the 9.7 in the winter.
Okay.
So was that right?
That was
in the summertime. So
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
And I wasn't aware of that too, and so maybe we should probably talk about that as well with the council, because I think that kind of factors into it. And I'm not a big fan of artificially keeping taxes or rates down just to keep them down. I think we need to stay consistent. So.
Yeah, I mean and then to further explain or re-explain, like you asked just a moment ago, we have in 2016 we did raise the rates, and the recommendation in that report was that we would do small incremental rate increases every year for the next 4 years.
Okay.
An increase that is similar to the one we're asking for now. And